Hi everyone, we will soon be entering sort of like into a mini era where there will be many fights featuring elemental lockouts. Elemental lockouts is a term and concept that's fairly new in the GL version of the game, and based on comments that I see sort of floating around, there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding on what elemental lockout is, and importantly how is it different versus elemental weakness. Because of that, the purpose of this video is to very briefly cover how is it different between elemental lockouts versus elemental weakness. If you want more further in-depth information on elemental lockouts, do check out this awesome video made by Black Nero. I'll include the link in the video description as well. He very nicely covered an overview on elemental lockouts, which stages these involve, what elements will be locked out, and of course which characters will do poorly in lockout stages versus those who will do nicely. And finally, he also covers some ways to get around elemental lockouts. So if you want more information, do check his video out. Since he has very nicely covered all the key information behind elemental lockouts, the only purpose left of this video is to further clarify again, how is it really different versus the concept of elemental imperil and weakness? And it's very important to know that it's two different mechanics in play here, and I'll cover that in the next slide. So on the left hand side, I cover the key points on what is elemental lockout, and on the right hand side, I cover on what is elemental weakness and imperil. I try to sort of put the points side by side to one another so that you can see how they really differ from each other. Again, it's important to clarify that it's two separate or different mechanics in play here, so even if you are able to hit elemental weakness, you can actually still hit elemental lockout in tandem as well. In essence, elemental lockout is a concept where the bosses has an innate brave damage resistance unless you hit very specific elements. So for example, in the upcoming stage where Ferris FR will be released, it's actually sort of like the first of the elemental lockout stages. In that fight, on top of all the usual Shinryu level auras that the bosses have, they also have an additional plus 100% brave damage resistance to all forms of brave damage, and this includes even non-elemental brave damage. That's right, lockout also includes non-elemental brave damage, except for very specific elements, and in Ferris's stage, for example, those elements are water, wind and thunder. 100% brave damage resistance may not seem like a lot, but don't forget that this stacks on top of all the other auras and defense that the bosses have, and it greatly cripples the brave damage that you can do. On the other hand, elemental weakness is really just a brave damage modifier if you happen to hit the boss with an element that the boss is weak to. Because these are two different mechanics in play, you can still be hitting elemental weakness. So for example, in the Ferris fight, if you imperil the boss with an element, say for example fire element using Lulu, yes, you'll still be seeing the weakness indicator pop up when you do your brave damage, but your brave damage will still be hitting the lockout and suffer from the 100% damage penalty. There is no way to remove the lockouts. The amount of resistance to brave damage can differ from lockout stage to lockout stage. In the Ferris fight coming up, the bosses will be resistant to 100%, and gradually as we go further into the era, the resistance will slowly build up to the point where there are fights that will have 999% brave damage resistance, effectively neutering all brave damage that you do. It will sort of be reduced to 1 brave damage unless you hit those specific elements. Moving on to point number 2, and this is a very important differentiator between elemental lockout and elemental weakness. In elemental lockouts, even if you can hit one of the elements that the boss does not lock out, again going back to the Ferris fight where the boss is not resistant to water, thunder and wind element, even if you do elementals according to the tree, if you bring another element together. And one good example here is if you use Ash LD Core, for example, where she enchants the party with Thunder, which the boss is not resistant to, but also enchants the party with Holy, which the boss is resistant to. Because you are also hitting for Holy damage, you will still hit the innate Brave damage resistance, and your Brave damage will still be resisted by 100%. This is vastly different than the weakness mechanic that we all know and love. In the weakness mechanic, as long as you are able to hit an element that the boss is weak to, it doesn't really matter what other elements that you bring to, even if the other elements are resisted or even absorbed by the boss. Now this might sound rather complicated, and this is the reason why I include point number 3, which in my view is sort of an easy way to view lockout versus weakness. So in elemental lockout, what you want to do is hit specifically the elements that the stage is asking you to, and the stage will check to see if you are using another element outside of the allowed elements. So if you're using a locked out element, you will be hitting the Brave damage resistances that the stage has. On the other hand, in the weakness mechanic, the stage is really just checking to see whether or not you're using an element that the boss is weak to. I guess another easy way to look at it is that in elemental lockouts, the lockout elements, or in other words the resisted elements, take priority when considering the penalty, whereas for elemental weakness, the element that the boss is weak to take priority over the resisted elements. So it's sort of the other way around. Anyway, that's it for this video. If the video has been helpful, do leave a like, comment and subscribe. Really helps a lot. Till then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!